fruits, nuts, and seeds.
Chapati, thank you for teaching us to be healthy.
The energy that I feel with these meals.
Chapati, that was really yummy.
Like a kid with no toys. Health is my greatest joy. Come and see, come and be with our host Chapati.
Hello and welcome to Food with Life. I am your host Chapati, and we're here in Los Angeles, California with two wonderful doctors. Dr. Tobi Fishel, who is the founder of the School of Integrative Health at Vanderbilt University, and a Dr. Marc Weigensberg, who is the director for the School of Integrative Health at Keck School of Medicine, University of Southern California. Very nice to have you both here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
You know, I was reading, can I call you Dr. Marc? Is it okay?
Absolutely, yes.
I was reading, Dr. Marc, that, you know, these kids these days, you read and you hear about it, but until you run into someone at the school or at the swimming pool, or that 1 out of every 2 kids almost are overweight in schools these days, and 1 out of every 3 is considered obese. This may a little bit be a high number, but it is shocking. Tell me your wisdom here, because you deal many times with children and kids.
Yes, right. I see these children because as a pediatric diabetes specialist, one of the complications of obesity in our kids, and we're seeing this more and more in this era, is type 2 diabetes, which used to be a disease of adults. I never saw a child with type 2 diabetes in my training, but nowadays they really account for about 50% of my kids with diabetes that I see in clinic. And I think you're probably aware that, as you stated, since probably the early to mid-1980s, the prevalence of obesity among our children and adolescents has been really increasing. It seems to have leveled off over the last 5 years, but as you said, the newest data says about 20% obese and about a third, 1 out of 3 obese or overweight, and higher in the more higher at-risk minority populations, particularly the urban minority populations in the country.
So higher at risk of getting diabetes, or would you say?
Higher risk of both obesity and diabetes.
Now, how do these kids fare as far as their heart health? You know, people who are overweight or obese.
Right. Well, that's a really good question, because what goes along with risk for diabetes in an obese child is also a risk for future heart disease, cardiovascular disease. So that includes future, risk for future strokes, heart attacks, etc.
Right.
And we're seeing more and more of those risk factors be prevalent. So very high cholesterol levels, high blood pressure, and so we're really quite concerned about lowered life expectancy in the current generation of kids compared to past generations.
More depression with obese kids.
Yep.
Yeah, because these are kids. I can't imagine when I was young, being at the prime of my life and being on the edge of am I going to make it or not? Tell me, Dr. Tobi, what is your experience for how can we turn this around? We talk about it, but that isn't enough. We want to make some changes.
Right. Well, it needs to be a multifaceted approach. A lot of people have tried 1 thing, 2 things, 3 things. We have to actually look at a whole community of things that we need to do. So 1, we're a sedentary society now, especially if you're in the urban areas. There aren't places that are safe to move, to play, to be in nature, and we're a high-tech society now, right? So kids are, I think the latest study was 4 or 5 hours on their little iPods and games and Xboxes, and then you add TV onto that, so kids aren't moving. They're not moving their bodies. So that's a big issue. So how can we make city planning so that there are more parks, so that kids, even they can have high tech and also be outside, ride their bike, get moving again. So that's one thing. The other thing is we have food deserts in the urban areas. So even if someone knows what to eat, which that's another topic,
yes.
even when they know what to eat, if they have no access to it because there's just a local very fast food store and that's where people can afford to go to eat, it's processed food, it has high sugar, it has high salt, and that leads to obesity, and that leads to feeling really yucky in your body actually, poor sleep, could lead to anxiety when you eat that much sugar, and a whole host of difficulties. So we need to actually have fresher foods that are affordable to folks who don't usually have access to that.
Right.
Right.
And foods that they can be served in school.
Absolutely.
Not frozen foods and not foods that don't have nutrition.
Right. So there's a huge movement in some schools, particularly charter schools across the country, where they are changing their whole way that they're offering food. So they're having fresh food, they're cooking the food right there rather than all this packaged food that's coming in. The kids are saying that they actually like the food more. There are government grants so that families can afford the food, and they're paying more attention in school. They're not falling asleep so much. They're feeling better. So it makes a huge difference. What we put in our body makes a huge difference to our overall health.
Right. I know what scares me as I drive my car sometimes. I see kids walking the streets and kids doing this somewhere, but they're totally not in touch with what they're doing. They have the headphones on. Sometimes they're walking looking at the iPhones or the screens or what have you. So they're not, they're walking or whatever, but I was crossing I was driving, again, perfectly with the law. The light turned green, I was about to turn right, and two kids going against the traffic on a red light, walking right across, and I almost hit them. I had to jam on my brakes, and the kids look at us like there's something I'm doing wrong.
Right. Right.
And this is what is scary and frightening,
Yeah.
They
Not paying attention.
Exactly.
We're not living in the moment. We're not paying attention.
Exactly.
Right.
Totally dismissed from what's happening.
Right. And we do that with food. We do that with food all the time. If we don't pay attention, when I used to not pay attention, I could eat a bag of chocolate chip cookies. They could be stale chocolate chip cookies, and I wouldn't even know that I ate the whole bag till I realized, oh, there are crumbs all over the place. So we're constantly doing too many things, too fast, not paying attention. We have to really think about why we're in that mess right now, this rat race.
We'll talk about this in 1 second, all right? We'll take a break, all right? I am your host, Chapati. This is Food with Life. We'll be right back. Stay with us, please. Welcome back to Food with Life. I am your host, Chapati. We're here with our very special guests, Dr. Tobi Fishel and Dr. Marc Weigensberg. Again, very pleasant to have you. So you were talking a bit about, Dr. Tobi, the fast pace, and what can be done.
Right. So these kids have input of stimulation so much that they're bombarded by it, and that causes actually a lot of anxiety. And often what we do when we're anxious is we try to work harder and we go faster, and we tend to eat or drink or do anything that numbs us while we're still going fast. So it's a crazy vicious cycle, and so we actually need to think about how we're going to address stress. And
well, on that vein, it's many people, they have a lack of attention. I know sometimes you ask someone who's eating, you ask them 3-4 hours later, what did you have for lunch?
Right.
You say, I'm not sure.
Right.
So it's a matter of intention when you're eating, and have attention on what you're eating, or that you're eating and you're doing something for your health.
Right. Well, so I started a program of mindful eating at the center back at Vanderbilt, and we did this for people, anyone who wanted to come. We also had a special program for people with diabetes. So they already had diabetes. They were already told that they really needed to watch their diet and increase their activity level. yet they were still having difficulties. So what's so beautiful about teaching mindful eating is you're teaching someone how to have a different relationship with their body, with food in general, and how to nourish themselves, really how to have love and compassion for themselves. And the first step is we're going to take a breath, just one breath, because we don't even take deep breaths. We're very shallow breathers because we're running around all the time. So to have a group of people sit and take a breath together, then notice what food is on their plate. Then notice how it smells. Notice how it tastes. What happens is when you engage all the senses, when you're eating and you do it in a slow way, in a compassionate way, with nourishment as being the whole idea, people ate less. They chose different foods to eat. We had lots of choices, healthy foods and non-healthy foods. They had their choice of what they were going to eat during our meal together. And by the end of 8 weeks, they felt better emotionally, they felt better physically, and they were eating less at home, and they were teaching their family members how to do that too. So the teenagers were teaching their parents, the parents were teaching their kids. It was really wonderful.
That's nice, a kind of a mutual thing going on.
Yeah.
You know, it's wonderful. And what more is important is, on a deeper level, their heart.
Their heart was
This
very,
love
very
is beginning to come forth from the kids to the parents and back and forth.
And you can't feel that connection if you're running.
Right.
If you don't stop. We have to stop and actually experience what's going on.
Right. Dr. Marc, let me ask you, in this whole thing with the obesity issue and stress, which is a big root of all this mess, as you say in the West, a mess. What happens in the physiology as a doctor?
Right. Well, that's a really good question. It's been really clearly shown, first of all, in adults, that adults who are under chronic life stress will tend to alter the stress hormone response in their bodies, which tends to both promote leading behaviors that can lead to obesity, such as eating, very high caloric, low nutritional value foods, and also, once obese, the cortisol or stress hormone axis potentiates the complications of obesity, such as towards diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and towards cardiovascular or heart disease. So this has been pretty clearly shown in adults since the late 90s, and now we're developing, we've shown some data in our obese adolescents in East LA that this is present in kids as well, so that high levels or alterations in the stress hormone axis promote obesity and promotes obesity-related complications such as risk for type 2 diabetes. So there's a physiologic bodily response to all the chronic life stress we're under.
All right. We're going to take a break because there's a lot more to talk about what I call a physiological calamity. Okay, stay with us. I am your host, Chapati. This is Food with Life. We'll be right back. Stay with us, please. Welcome back to Food with Life. I am your host, Chapati, with our very special guests, Dr. Tobi Fishel and Dr. Marc Weigensberg. So, let me ask you, Dr. Tobi, we're talking about this nice, coherent relationship beginning to develop in family and parents and the children. And how can we change this outside? Perhaps what I feel is a very important thing is schools, what they serve the children. I know I've heard improvement is they're serving now on kids' plates with a salad, they serve 1 carrot. Or maybe 1 red tomato, But this is just a tip of the iceberg. So tell me what your ideas are, or how we can actually make a big change.
Yeah, that's a really great issue. Kids spend 8 hours, 10 hours a day in schools. And often, if you're low income family, you're having breakfast and lunch at schools, not just lunch. So 2 of your meals are there. Sometimes they don't have dinner at all. Sometimes they have dinner. what's wonderful is there's a movement in schools across the country where there's some charter schools and a few public schools where the importance of changing food and nutrition has gotten to the forefront of principals and the school boards, and so there are some grants now that are paying for schools to have really healthy food. So they're changing what they're serving. They're cooking some of the food right there, and they ask the kids, "Do you like the food? How do you feel after you eat this food?" And what they're finding, hands down, is that the kids want to have more of the school lunches and the school breakfast because it actually tastes good now. They have access to it, they can afford it, and they feel better after. They don't have that slump that they used to have after because it was all carbs before. Now it's actually a really balanced meal, and they're learning more about what balanced meals are. So approaching the school is very, very important.
So let me ask you, Dr. Marc, there's a wonderful policy of instituting it in the schools and all this, but how can we actually make this happen?
Well, I think the schools are under pressure, and I think our policymakers, this brings in the issue, first of all, of policy, and as a culture, as a society, we have to decide that we're going to address this, and there have been some good things, like in California now, the public schools cannot have vending machines with sugary beverages, which we know is a major promoter of obesity, despite what the sugar companies will tell you. I think the scientific evidence behind that is not assailable anymore. But there's also the question of how to deal with the chronic stress that kids are under. You alluded to earlier, the stress of all the incoming information, technological, and also stress in the neighborhoods, and all those difficulties. And we're starting to develop programs in the schools for stress reduction, for mindful applications to their lives, whether it's in the classrooms just on a day-to-day basis, or for instance at USC I'm leading a program where we're actually introducing the kids to a way to develop ways of using their imagination and their stress reduction, empowering themselves to understand how to reduce their stress, become more mindful, and then use that in the way they approach food and develop new relationships to food. So a combination of both stress reduction and nutritional approaches such as mindful eating, or another one called intuitive eating, which really stress building a good relationship with food and with eating, so that you're really dealing with it both on educating and providing healthier foods, and also developing the inner wisdom in the body to appreciate those foods and look for satisfying ways to eat, so that the kids really learn how to do that.
Right.
And just driving by one of the high schools, local high schools here, was really exciting because on the side of the high school, big sign, community garden. So first time this very big school has a community garden where the kids go out and actually learn about that food doesn't come in a package, right? That green beans actually grow out of the ground.
Growing food.
It's really amazing. So when you grow your own food, it's so much more exciting, and then you have a very different relationship with food. I was a big sister for inner city boys for many years. And I was just so amazed when I took them to a restaurant, and first time we had a salad, and they said, "What is this?" And I said, "It's a tomato."
Wow.
They had these 8-year-old boys had never seen a tomato. So and that really opened my eyes to the severity of the issue in so many ways.
And there are research studies showing now, just coming out, that community gardening, school-based gardening, really can reduce obesity, reduce eating behaviors that lead to obesity, and really have a good benefit. So connecting with the earth and the land in that way, in a natural way, and avoiding the plastic. I tell my kids now, anything that's in a plastic bag, multiple colors, and cartoon characters is not food.
Right. It's spooky almost. We did a show a while back, Chapati's Kids Snack Corner. It's a children's show we do. And we had 6 or 7 kids of all ethnicities, and we were going through packages and looking at the backs of them, and the name of the show was called Reading Labels. Kids had no idea what any of these things were, but generally they saw on most of the packages the first 2 or 3 ingredients were sugar and salt. and maybe corn syrup. The first 2 or 3, and these were from companies that put them out that would predicate health. So what can you say about that? It's a hypocrisy.
Can I come?
Well, I
Go
want
ahead.
to say that I teach people to go on the outside, the outskirts of the supermarkets, to avoid the middle part of the supermarkets. The middle part are bagged, boxed, and canned foods.
Yes.
So if you have to have one of those items, certainly reading the labels is important, and picking things that have salt and sugar way down the list. That's great. If you can have an apple and a carrot and things that are whole and natural, that absolutely don't have any process to them, much healthier.
It seems like it would almost be wonderful if the U.S. government came down with a law where the children have to eat 1 piece of fresh food a day. Whether it was an apple, a carrot, a tomato, or something. Just to get them in this process. You're going to say something, Dr. Marc.
Well, I was going to say that our tongues like 3 flavors: salt, sugar, and fat.
Yes.
And so the advertising companies are taking advantage of that. And I tell my kids, don't believe the hype.
Right.
But I think that we really have to look at the evidence for what's damaging and toxic to our kids. And again, as a culture, as a society, we have to make those decisions. And because the sugar companies and the fast food companies are, special interest to keep their products on the market.
Right.
But they're really doing damage
So
to
there's
us
a lot
as a
of
nation.
money involved.
That's right.
That's the issue, and that's the culprit.
Right.
Yes.
So we're going to take a break, and then we have many more things to get back to. All right, hang with us. I am your host, Chapati. This is Food with Life. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Food with Life. I am your host, Chapati, with our very special guests, Dr. Tobi. We were talking about these big companies, and Dr. Marc, you were mentioning how they put on this packaging and all this, and we don't know what's inside. And then many times it's not really healthy at all. So what can we do to turn this inside out? Is there something that we can do psychologically? I know lots of times we get stuck on eating because it's an emotional thing. We're going through some stress or something happening, and we grab for the nearest thing, and we don't know what it is, but we need something. So,
well, I think it's so complex because we emotionally eat. All of us do. I certainly have done it. Ice cream can be my best friend and my nemesis. But what I think happens is that we emotionally eat, or we emotionally deal with things by something addictive and not paying attention. So it could be lots of things. It could be TV. It could be drowning out with music. A lot of times it's food along with something else, right?
But that's the thing, many times our food and our eating has nothing to do with it's just driven by our psychology.
Right, and so the vicious cycle is where the public is bombarded by this idea that we should all be on a diet.
Mm.
And so it creates a lot of anxiety about our bodies, how we look, what we should eat. So a lot of people, particularly I would say adolescent girls and young women, they are obsessed with calories, and so they're counting calories and they're eating very little, and what they eat is not very nutritious, so they feel horrible, already feeling horrible, and now they're feeling worse physically. Then they might binge and they emotionally eat, and then they feel horrible again, and so the rate of eating disorders has gone up. Young people who have anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, it's crazy. And so really it's not just what we eat, but how we eat and how we feel about ourselves inside. Yes. Getting to the bottom core of what is this image that we're trying to portray?
I have to touch here, because you see, There's so many magazines all over the world. Not just magazines, but internet. Big, strong men, huge muscles, no concern, no thought about what's inside of that, So a boy will say, oh, I want to grow up to be like that. And he doesn't even think about his psyche, or his psychology. Or girls, beautiful women in bikinis and, these bras and panties, and they walk around with these, figures that like it's just, and all these girls say, oh, I would have looked like that, and they don't think about inside. They think that they see the body and the shell, and that's it.
The whole movement of Barbie dolls was just really horrible for girls, because what they did was they looked at the proportions of a Barbie doll, and some engineers tried to figure out how a human woman would look if the Barbie doll was life size, and it was impossible. The woman couldn't even stand up because it was so disproportionate. And so our idea of what girls should look like, what a man starts to think a woman should look like, and what a woman thinks a woman should look like is really skewed,
Yeah.
And so this wonderful woman, I wish I could remember her name, but she just did a YouTube video about a year ago where she took all of these used Barbie dolls, and she took all the makeup off with some alcohol, acetone.
Yes.
Right? She's taking
Acetone,
clearing it
yeah.
because they had all this makeup on. She clipped their hair into really cute bobs, and she took all the clothes that were really tight fitting, and she made just really cute dresses, and they're called Real Girls, and they're going like hotcakes. The little girls love them. So when you actually give people another choice that's more realistic, they'll actually go for it. It was very heartwarming to see Real Girls. Yeah.
My thought. Do you have something to say or add about that, Mark, Dr. Mark?
No, I think there's a big problem with body image and everything that Dr. Fishel said. I would agree with. And I just think I think your point about getting to the inside. So practices that are, say, mindfulness-based practices, or some of the complementary alternative medicine practices such as guided imagery, or even relaxation breath work that can allow a kid to get centered and into themselves and their whole selves, not just the body, as you said, but the body, the mind, the spirit.
Right, the
that
spirit.
that they really are something, and get to know themselves, so they're not just being tossed back and forth by advertisings, by a culture's warped idea of what a human being should look like. And they really get into then also a better relationship with themselves. Then they can build a relationship to how they eat, how they exercise. That's really based on, well, what do I need for myself, versus what other people are telling me I want.
Yes.
So what I found, and what the researchers found, is that the whole idea of self-worth for kids is really, really low. Lower than it used to be. Certainly it's a big issue. So if someone doesn't have a feeling of self-worth, they have to get their idea of worth on the outside. On the outside.
Exactly.
From
so their friends.
From their friends.
Or someone else.
That's right. That's right. And so so it's natural to look towards your friends when you're in that adolescent period. That's what's supposed to happen. That's the peer group that's going to teach you things. But if your peer group doesn't have a good sense of self-worth, and everyone is really, as I'll use the word, messed up, we're really struggling. So it's a really difficult time. It's really hard for these kids to, I think, try these practices if they don't learn self-compassion first.
Yes.
So in my practice, a lot of kids are referred to me who self-injure, who binge or restrict food, have a terrible sense of identity, have depression. Most of them have had some trauma, pretty significant trauma. Now, all of that together, right? So how do they take care of themselves? They don't in a healthy way. And so I actually teach them self-compassion practices, which is a way to learn how to be kind to yourself before anything else. Because if you feel terrible about yourself, and someone says, we're going to take a breath and we're going to spend just a minute just meditating and being with ourselves, if you already have terrible thoughts going on in your head, it's excruciating. No one wants to do that. So you actually have to teach someone how to be with themselves with some kindness, and then they can do the practices for longer. So we start really small, and we teach kindness first.
Right, beautiful, beautiful. Or the other thing is, sometimes these meditation practices breed their self-compassion.
Right.
They work together very
They work
well.
together.
I want to thank you both very, very much for taking your time to be with us.
Thank you for
here at
having
Food
us
with
here.
Life.
Yes.
A lot to learn.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a long way to go.
A long way to go, but we're starting.
Yes.
We're rolling.
We're rolling.
I am your host, Chapati, with our wonderful guests, Dr. Tobi Fishel and Dr. Marc Weigensberg. I want to thank you very much for watching. We'll see you very soon. Be well, be healthy, and look within. Bye-bye.